Have you ever traveled through the beautiful American Southwest, admiring all the fantastic scenery, and wondered about some of the different geologic or geographic features you see around you? Then you look at a map and see names like butte, mesa, or plateau, and now you wonder, which is which? How do I tell a mesa from a plateau? What makes them different from each other? And why does my map call something that looks like a plateau a mesa? What's going on? It's so confusing. Well, you're not the only one who's confused. We were too. So we did some investigating and want to share what we learned with you in this video. There are lots of interesting geologic features to be found in the Southwest, but our focus for this video will be on the three larger features, which are plateaus, mesas, and buttes. You'll see examples of each of them and we'll explain the differences. Some of the other features are smaller and have funny names, like beehives, hoodoos, teepees, and toadstools. We'll touch briefly on these in this video, but there's a lot to tell about them too, and they deserve their own video. We're working on that. All right, let's get started. And as we do, please keep in mind that geology is a huge topic, and we only have time in this video to talk about some of the highlights. We'll start with the largest of our three geologic features, the plateau. A plateau is generally defined as a large land area having a relatively level surface, like a high plain or tableland, that is raised sharply above the adjacent land by steep slopes or cliffs on at least one or two sides. These slopes or cliffs are often referred to as escarpments. Because plateaus are so large, there are many sections to them, and the top is not consistent or flat. For example, one plateau I'll talk about in a moment has its lowest elevation around 4,000 feet, or 1,200 meters, and its highest is around 10,000 feet, or 3,000 meters. Plateaus and mesas have similar characteristics, with one main difference between them being their size. A plateau is so big that you usually can't see it with a sweep of the eye from one location at ground level. You might be able to see a single view of an entire plateau from an airplane or even from space. A mesa, however, can usually be seen with one sweep of the eye. In the Southwest, the granddaddy of all plateaus is the Colorado Plateau. Thanks to the Colorado Plateau, it is responsible for creating many of the places in the Southwest that we know and love, like the area from the Grand Canyon to Bryce Canyon, and from Canyonlands to Zion Canyon. The Colorado Plateau itself is worthy of its own video too, but we only have time to do an overview here. It's already on our list of future videos. Here's a map of the Colorado Plateau. As you can see, it takes up a good chunk of eastern Utah, a big chunk of northern Arizona, and small pieces of both Colorado and New Mexico. The steep slopes of the Colorado Plateau can be found on its western and southern borders. Its western border consists of the Hurricane Cliffs, or Hurricane Fault, that runs roughly from Seligman, Arizona in the south, north across the Grand Canyon to Hurricane, Utah, which is where its name comes from. Then follows I-15 to roughly Beaver, Utah in the north. The southern border is the steep slopes of the Mogollon Rim in northern Arizona. It runs roughly from Sedona in the west to Fort Apache in the east. The Colorado Plateau is huge when compared to other plateaus that, believe it or not, exist on top of the Colorado Plateau itself. It covers 130,000 square miles, or for viewers outside of the USA, 336,700 square kilometers. It is one of the largest plateaus in North America, but is not the largest in the world. That title belongs to the Tibetan Plateau, which includes the Himalayan mountains and covers a whopping 1.5 million square miles, or 2.5 million square kilometers. According to most geologists, the Colorado Plateau formed between 70 and 30 million years ago, when tectonic forces from both the east and west pushed towards each other and pushed up or uplifted the landmass of the plateau. It was this uplift that was later responsible for creating many of those famous features in the Colorado Plateau as water eroded deep into the layers over the last 2 to 8 million years. As mentioned, there are many smaller plateaus within the Colorado Plateau itself, and each of them is bordered by steep escarpments on 2 or more sides. The Paria Plateau, located west of Page, Arizona, is one of them. It stands out as one of the best examples of a well-defined, easy-to-identify plateau. On a map, the Paria Plateau is very obvious, with steep cliffs bordering almost all 4 of its sides. When approaching it on Highway US 89A, you can clearly make out the plateau with its level surface on top that's about 1,500 feet or 450 meters, and it's definitely higher than the adjacent terrain. US 89A wraps around the southern edge of the plateau, which is also known as Vermilion Cliffs National Monument. The sides of the plateau, the Vermilion Cliffs themselves, are the star of the show when you take this drive. One plateau that isn't as obvious as the Paria is the Markagant Plateau, east of Cedar City, Utah, also known as Cedar Mountain. It actually shares the same western edge as the Colorado Plateau, the Hurricane Cliffs. The Markagant is the high plateau to the north of Zion National Park and is the source of the Virgin River, which is responsible for gouging out Zion Canyon. Just to the east of the Markagant is the Paunsaugunt Plateau. Most of its eastern boundary consists of the Pink Cliffs that are famously exposed inside Bryce Canyon National Park. Then there's the Aquarius Plateau that sits between the towns of Escalante and Torrey, Utah. All 3 of the aforementioned plateaus are volcanic in nature, with some of their height coming from numerous volcanic eruptions. One unique plateau is the Kaparwitz Plateau. It stretches roughly from Lake Powell to Escalante, Utah. It's unique because it is made up of a consistent rock group from the Cretaceous period and isn't volcanic like the others just mentioned. It is, however, similar to the Paria in that it has very defined steep slopes on most of its sides. The Kaparwitz is a good example of a plateau because you can't see the whole thing from ground level. When driving US 89 or boating on Lake Powell, it's so big that you can't even see its entire southern edge from horizon to horizon. All right, enough about plateaus. They are not features that you're going to make out from the window of your car because they're simply too big. You'll see some of their steep slopes and cliffs, but you wouldn't know their full size without seeing them from the air. The next smaller geologic feature down from a plateau is a mesa. This feature is easier to identify as you're driving down a highway. Mesas can still be very large, but are small enough that you could see the entire thing in one sweep of the eye. A mesa is generally defined as an isolated, flat-topped landmass with steep slopes or escarpments on all sides and standing distinctly above a surrounding plain. They are also wider, sometimes much wider, than they are tall. Unlike a plateau, the top of a mesa is usually very flat and maintains the same elevation. One primary reason for this is because of what's called a caprock that's located at the top. This caprock is a rock layer that is very hard and resistant to water erosion. It protects the softer rock layers below that make up the base of the mesa, the base being more prone to erosion. A classic example of a mesa is Hurricane Mesa near Hurricane, Utah. Like most mesas, it's capped with a very tough rock layer known as the Chunarump conglomerate. Here's a close-up of this difficult-to-pronounce cap rock. As its title indicates, it's a conglomerate, a cemented mixture of an abundant number of small rocks that were once polished and rounded when this layer was part of a giant braided riverbed many millions of years ago. By the way, the Chunarump conglomerate can be found all over the Southwest, forming the tops of many mesas. Because of its ability to resist erosion, there are pieces of it all over the place, such as here near Capitol Reef National Park, here along the base of the Vermilion Cliffs, and all over the St. George area on the tops of various mesas. Hurricane Mesa is so flat on top that, at one time, the United States Air Force decided to build a 2-mile-long test track on top of it to test ejection seats for supersonic fighter jets. All of these planes had the design of their ejection seats tested on top of Hurricane Mesa. They would test the seats by getting them up to supersonic speeds on the track, then launching them over the edge of the mesa. This is the end of the test track. Testing still continues today by private companies, not the Air Force, and not over the edge of the mesa. The rock unit below the Chunarump conglomerate cap rock is what geologists call the Moenkopi Formation. Looking closely at this rock unit, you can see how crumbly it is and how running water would easily erode it. When it does erode, as you can see on the side of Hurricane Mesa, it always erodes at a 45-degree angle because of its soft composition. The sides of many mesas erode away at a similar angle. The reason why I picked Hurricane Mesa as an example is that it is attached to another mesa just behind it called Smith Mesa, which is roughly 5 times bigger than Hurricane Mesa. It also has a very strong cap rock on top with a name that's a little less strange. It's called Springdale Sandstone. When you walk on top of the Springdale Sandstone, you'll see that it too is a very hard-packed rock layer. But it's not a conglomerate of rocks like the Chunarump. No, it's solid sandstone, where a layer of sand was strongly cemented together, kind of like the cliffs you see on the sides of Zion Canyon. Incidentally, you can see the Springdale Sandstone layer near its namesake, the town of Springdale, located at the mouth of Zion Canyon. When the layers above it eventually erode away millions of years from now, you can bet that the Springdale Sandstone will create another mesa similar to Smith Mesa. Around the Southwest, you'll find multiple mesas like this, where a lower mesa, like Hurricane Mesa, is connected to a higher mesa like Smith Mesa. Just like with other things, Mother Nature can make it tricky to correctly identify different features. Mesas can still be fairly small. Bottom line though, a mesa is a mesa if it's wider than it is tall and is usually an isolated, standalone feature. We could do a whole slideshow with just examples of mesas across the Southwest, but it would go on and on. Instead, here's just a few examples. The next time you look at a mesa, see if you can find the resistant cap rock that is responsible for creating the mesa. Then, look around, right and left, to see if you can find other nearby mesas that look similar to this one. Then try to imagine that they used to be one contiguous mesa before erosion created the gaps between them. And now, use your imagination a little more to think about how erosion will make these mesas smaller and smaller over eons of time. What will they look like? You shouldn't be too surprised when we tell you that they'll eventually turn into the next feature we're going to talk about. So, how would you like to go on a tour where we can show you all these things? Not just plateaus and mesas, but more of that magnificent scenery and landscapes found all around southwest Utah. We offer tours to destinations around the St. George and Greater Zion areas. One of our tour experiences will take you out to see all of the fascinating geology that makes this place so scenic because of its transition zone of where the Colorado Plateau, Mojave Desert, and Great Basin all come together. Learn more about our tours by visiting our website at backroadswest.com. Then select Backroads West Creative Travel Guides here, and lastly, select Tours up here. This will list our different tours and tour guide services. The direct link for this webpage is in the description for this video. For example, our geology tour is the tour that showcases the scenery around the St. George area. Scroll down to learn the tour details and click the Send Email button if you have any questions or would like to book a tour. We'll get back to you as soon as we can with your answers. All right, last but not least, the next smaller geologic feature down from a mesa is a butte. A butte is generally defined as an isolated landform with steep, often vertical sides that is taller than it is wide and has a small, relatively flat top. Basically, a butte is a former mesa that has completely eroded away but still has some of its caprock intact. Once that caprock is gone, erosion of the butte will accelerate. Its top will no longer be flat, but more rounded or jagged, depending on the butte's rock material. Some buttes become so narrow, they're referred to as spires, needles, or pinnacles. This is more of a butte, and these are considered more of a spire or a needle. Spires have usually completely lost their caprock. Classic examples of buttes can be found at Monument Valley, with the most classic and recognizable of those being the West and East Mittens. There's also plenty of other buttes scattered around Monument Valley. The totem pole in Monument Valley is a good example of a spire. It was once a butte that has eroded away into several spires. Some would say that the skinniest one has definitely become a needle, the next size down from a spire. In fact, you can see that the totem pole spires were most likely attached to this mesa to the right at one time. These features are also close to Monument Valley. The one in the foreground is Church Rock, and the one in the distance is Agatha Peak. Both of these were once volcanic vents, possibly with a classic volcanic cone around them. Over time, all the softer rock of the cone has eroded away, and what's left is its hard-packed basalt center, called a volcanic plug or volcanic neck. Further erosion has turned them all into spires. Devil's Tower in Wyoming is most likely a volcanic neck, too. However, some geologists disagree. Either way, Devil's Tower is another example of a classic butte. The debris that erodes away and falls down from either mesas or buttes is called scree or talus. As this debris breaks away from the near vertical side of them, it accumulates and builds up, creating shallower slopes below the more vertical slopes. Talus is a very loose material, typically composed of a mixture of rocks and boulders. Hiking through talus can be very challenging. And now, before we move on to the last of the geologic features on our list, have you noticed a pattern here? You can just see how powerful the force of erosion is in nature. The massive plateaus erode away to become mesas, which erode to become buttes, which erode even more to become spires or needles, and on and on. I think it's pretty amazing to be roaming around and seeing all these transformations going on all over and right in front of our eyes. And lastly, we'll briefly touch on some of those smaller geologic features that often get named incorrectly. These are things like hoodoos, toadstools, beehives, and teepees. One way that might make it easy to remember is that Bryce Canyon National Park has hoodoos, whereas Zion National Park has beehives, which are found on the park's west and east sides. In general, a hoodoo is a vertical column of rock that resembles a chimney. It's tall and narrow, often stands alone, and usually doesn't have a caprock on top. Beehives are rounded in shape, not as tall as a hoodoo, and resemble the top half of a buried beehive. Teepees are like a beehive, but have a more pointed top. Overall, teepees are more conical in shape, just like the classic Native American teepee we're all familiar with. Teepees are common in the Coyote Buttes area of the Paria Plateau in Vermilion Cliffs National Monument. Lastly, there's the toadstool. These are commonly mistaken for hoodoos. The difference is that toadstools have a large proportion of caprock to base ratio, making them shorter and more squat-looking than a hoodoo. Most importantly, though, a toadstool's caprock protects the material below it that is more prone to erosion. The caprock acts like an umbrella for the toadstool's base. As you can see, it can be difficult to tell the difference between these types of features, and it is often up to the discretion of the observer to decide which is which. And that sums up this tour into the world of plateaus, mesas, buttes, and a few other geologic features found in the Southwest. We hope that as you travel around this area and see maps or place names with these labels attached, you'll now have a better understanding of what they are and what they will become as time goes by. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy exploring!